well, welcome everybody to our presentation this morning. Today we have myself, Cailin Kowalewski, Mo Tidball from Seneca County, and Marie Anselm from Ontario County, and we will be talking with you today about some of our farm-to-school efforts. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. Some webinar basics. You guys should probably know the drill. Your audio is muted. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or raise your hand. If we don't get to your question as we're going through the slides, then we'll address them all at the end. I think that's it at the moment. Okay, so a little introduction to this presentation. The three of us sort of started this conversation about farm to school as we were talking about our own projects happening in our region and what we've been working on in our various school districts. So myself, Marie, and Mo all have, I would say, unique programs in farm to school, and we all have varying levels of support in terms of programmatic support and also financial support in what we were doing. So we thought it would be really interesting to talk a little bit about what we have individually been doing and hear from some of you about how that fits into a larger conversation about farm to school that Extension has been participating in across New York State. Okay. So this is really our title slide, just a few lovely photos for you all. So a how-to for associations with USDA grants, state grants, and no grants. That's basically what we'll be covering today, how these things have really taken shape over the past few years with different kinds of support. Alrighty. So the real motivation for doing this is that we think that farm to school and extension are a match made in heaven, forgive the pun. So why do we think that? Essentially, Extension is really well placed, in our opinion, to do farm-to-school work. We have a history of working with growers who may be able to provide resources, obviously, for farm-to-school. In a lot of cases, Extension has extensive school relationships, especially with food service directors. We also have a really well-established history of sharing best practices for nutrition in cafeterias. We're involved with the Smarter Lunchroom movement. A lot of us have experience with procurement. We also do nutrition education and frequently sampling. Those were at least the things that we identified, the three of us, as we were talking about this as our main strengths, but I'm sure that there are others for other extension associations across the state. So, next up, we will have Marie Anselm from Ontario County, the Ag Economic Development Specialist there, and she will talk about her experiences with farm to school and the USDA. So I'm just going to hand this over to Marie. I'm going to stop sharing, and Marie, let me know if you have any issues sharing your own screen now.
Thank you, Cailin. So thank you all for your patience as I share screen with you. Okay, so my segment, I'm going to be talking about farm to school with the USDA. And that is because with our organization, we actually have a USDA farm to school planning grant, and that is through the Food and Nutrition Service. So for those of you not familiar with USDA funding for farm to school, again, through Food and Nutrition Service, there are planning grants, implementation grants, and training grants. The planning grant is really meant to establish a strong foundation for farm to school, and as such, you are doing planning activities. So with our grant, we were really looking to build relationships, with the school districts in the grant and farmers and farm to school partners. We were looking to do a needs assessment as to gaps in existing farm to school programming, and if we were to move forward with increased farm to school programming, what the needs would be. Collecting best practices, not just from schools regionally and locally, but also from a national level, success stories of what has worked, what has not worked well with farm to school. Training and networking. This was training for farm to school for farmers as well as food service staff, and then networking amongst all different parties involved in Farm to School, and then conducting community outreach. That was done mainly through farmers markets and, again, networking events. So who's making it happen? This was done, the grant was actually applied for by Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES. So Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES, which works with several school districts throughout the Finger Lakes region, they are a service provider organization, is the grant recipient. And then so Cornell Cooperative Extension Ontario County is really more subcontracting with them to execute the goals of the grant. The school districts involved were Penn Yan Central School District, which is in Yates County, Geneva City Schools, which is in Ontario County, Dundee Central, which is also in Yates County, and at the time had the same food service director as Penn Yan Central School District, and Romulus School District, which is in Seneca County. So you can see we had partners in school districts over a pretty wide region, and as you can imagine, they all had different farm to school programs and different levels of experience with farm to school. And I should add that these school districts signed up for the grant too, in part because with Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES as the main applicant, school districts had to opt into this grant. So that was originally in 2014, and those were the schools that had said they were interested in the time. And then our partners who were written into the grant as more of a support role were the New York Wine and Culinary Center, which is located in Canandaigua, New York, and Bloomfield Central School District. Their food service director, Todd Fowler, has done extensive farm to school work at the state level, and so with him being local, he was also written in as a support consultant for us. So essential resources. Relationships were definitely the biggest thing that determined our success in this program. Relationships with food service directors especially. Without the food service directors, we wouldn't be able to make progress on the ground. You really need buy-in from them and having a strong relationship with them to be collecting the information that you need to make the program successful and really getting that feedback from them. Commitment. That's not just from, again, the food service directors who are going to be the ones who are going to be actually committing to rolling out farm to school programs and purchasing local food, but I would say definitely on the part of CCE. It's really a program that has a lot of moving pieces to it, and so having, and can take some time, next point, to get going. So being committed to seeing that through is something I would recommend for anyone looking to get started in farm to school. And so again, time, again, just a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of coordinating, and farm to school programs generally are not built overnight. So it's a program that for us has really evolved over the past 2 years as we've worked on it, and as much as I would like to say there were shortcuts we could have taken, it really did take some time to get momentum going. And then money. So money, not just in terms of funding, because as Cailin will speak to, you certainly don't need a grant to be involved with farm to school work, but something heard repeatedly from the food service directors is that if there's not money to purchase the local food, then there's not going to be a farm to school program. And so that money does need to come from somewhere in the food services budget. What we could really use. Well, with our grants being a planning grant, again, we weren't looking to do next step implementation, though it was challenging sometimes not to get ahead of ourselves and want to jump right into some of those things. But we didn't actually have in-school support for a lot of those school programs, and I mean that in terms of nutrition or CCE staff that was able to go into schools. So again, I'm the agriculture economic development specialist here, but we at this office don't have nutrition staff directly on site. So that piece was missing a little bit from our programs, and I think would be helpful moving forward is having someone who could go into schools more and be coordinating some of that on the ground. And then implementation funding. So again, we were really trying to lay a groundwork for farm to school, but when you sit down and you identify all these strengths and weaknesses and challenges and whatnot moving forward, you come up with a lot of next step things that you'd like to do and don't always know how you're going to make that happen without some funding behind it. What we'd still like to achieve. We'd like to increase the number of farmers selling directly to schools. In our case with the school districts, there were a few farms that were selling directly, but the majority were going through distributors, which is great. But in the future, with our farm to school work, we'd like to be able to do more outreach to farms and build up a bigger database and of farms selling to schools and make those connections stronger. Because having on-farm impact is a really large component of farm to school. Increased variety of local foods. No pun intended here, but we found that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit for farm to school sourcing. So apples and grapes in this region were a pretty common thing, but when you start to move out of some of those common items, it was more difficult to source local, which also makes it challenging, again, to get more farms involved if there's a limited amount of products that schools can accept in terms of price point and grow season and whatnot. So really expanding that variety of local foods. Increasing the quantity and value of local foods purchased by schools. Again, just increasing volume. So instead of we only do this once a month, can we increase that, or can we do more recipe development and get more local food into schools year-round? And then increasing the visibility of farm to school and in school cafeterias. So again, kind of touched on having a presence in schools to be doing like farm to school tastings or handing out farm to school materials and getting the students more engaged, or being able to track on the ground what the impacts are a little bit more. We did have some marketing materials that we were able to purchase through this grant, so some signage that schools are able to put up, which we're very happy with. But again, just having actual reinforcement I think would be helpful to keeping momentum going. So with that, I will turn it over to Mo to speak to her experience with farm to school in Seneca County.
Okay, thanks, Marie. So if you can stop your sharing, I'll pull mine up. And again, thanks everyone for your patience as we work through this.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, hopefully you guys can all see that. If you cannot, please just type that into the chat menu and we'll see what we can do. So I'm Mo with Seneca County, and we have our second round of funding from New York State Department of Ag and Markets. Back in 2015, we received funding from the Department of Ag and Markets, and at that time they had $350,000 allocated for 6 programs across the state. In this most recent round of funding, they had $1 million allocated across the state to 12 programs, and my understanding is that the governor has pledged $1.5 million for next year. So it's really growing. There's a lot of support for farm to school with New York State and the Department of Ag and Markets. So that's great news for CCE. And as Cailin had mentioned, the match made in heaven, it appears that Ag and Markets believes that too, because there's at least 8 county associations receiving funding in this most recent round. So that's awesome. Some other good news is, so we've been doing this for a while, and we've created some nice resources, and we're totally willing to share that with anyone out there, any association, and you can find those on our Seneca County CCE webpage, and you'd have to look at food and family and then find farm to school. But this nice graphic that you can see here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. So we have a great graphic designer on staff, and she created this logo for us, and our farm to school educator, Sue Peterson, developed a sticker, so whenever we go into schools, we have an I8 local sticker with this farm to school logo, and there's all sorts of things like that that you guys can share, that we're willing to share. And so with our funding from Ag and Markets, that enables us to have a .2 FTE farm to school coordinator, and that's me, and then we also have a farm to school educator, which is Sue Peterson, to go into the schools. And as Marie mentioned, it's great to be able to get in the schools and really work directly with them to make this work. So some of the things that we're doing is creating a dedicated farm to school menu day. And this is not new. I know in New York City they have New York Thursdays, and in other states they have other specific days that are the farm to school day. And so to really make that work, what we found is we go in and we sit down with the food service director and we look at what's in season. So in the fall, October, we might go in and say, okay, we could do something with butternut squash. We came up with a butternutty mac and cheese recipe, which was great because it took a classic mac and cheese that kids are used to, and it didn't even really change the color much to add the butternut squash, but then suddenly it has a local vegetable in it with lots of vitamin A and fiber. So then what we would do is we would set a date for that to be on the school menu, and then the week before, our farm to school educator went in and offered samples with the kids and a little bit of education on that butternut squash and the nutrient it adds. And that it's a local product and the farmer that it comes from. We also help the food service directors source the product. And so we would just try to get the kids very excited to try it and then be excited to actually buy it when it's on the menu the next week. And so then it was offered on the menu. And around that day, we'd have asked the schools to put that on the morning announcements that today's farm to school day and butternutty mac and cheese is going to be on the menu. Make sure you order lunch. And there was signage in the cafeteria and things like that. And then we'd follow up with some social media posts, Twitter and Facebook, both on our CCE pages, and also the schools would post things as well to really create that momentum and excitement around the farm to school menu day. And we sent the kids home, especially the elementary school kids, with recipe cards that had the butternutty mac and cheese recipe and that nice farm to school logo, so that we were reinforcing that message at home. So that worked out really well, and like next month we're doing kale salad. Some of the schools have done asparagus, so it just depends on what they can source and what they can create in their schools, but we help support that with those steps. The other thing that we did right off the bat when we first got our New York State Ag and Markets funding was purchase apple sectionizers, and that's a picture of the apple sectionizers here. This is right out of the Smarter Lunchroom playbook. Their research shows that if kids can take a New York State apple and cut it into slices, they're more likely to eat it and more likely to not throw it out. It's tragic to see how many apples get thrown in the garbage can when they're whole, and sometimes when they're sliced too, but this really does help, and research shows that it helps the kids to take and eat the New York State apple. So we bought those for all of our schools, and this unit is about $250. So of course it's nice to have some grant money to be able to do that. And we put our stickers and logos and things like that on there. And the other thing that we're really doing is creating newsletters and the social media and lots of community awareness about farm to school, because it really does take a village to make farm to school work. So who's involved with it? As Marie said, we have all of our 4 school districts are involved, and that was started right at the grant writing process. So as soon as we were writing the grant, those 4 schools were bought into it. So there's 4 school districts in Seneca County with a total of 13 cafeteria lunchroom spaces. Obviously, Ag and Markets is helping quite a bit. Local farmers are involved. Of course, this is an area where we would like even more involvement, as Marie had said. I think that's a slow process, but we're getting there. And then in terms of Seneca County Cordell Cooperative Extension, it's not just our extension, but we're pulling on all the great resources of CCE. So looking at smarter lunchroom movements and incorporating lots of those aspects, working with our regional ag teams. 4-H has a lot of great connections with farm to school type activities. The 4-H Ag in the Classroom book this past month was actually beyond what we eat. Oh, shoot, I can't quite think of the name, but it was basically a farm to table book, and so that was read to all the elementary school kids for Ag Literacy Week, which works perfectly. Eat Smart New York and other programs obviously are going into the schools and doing nutrition education, so there's lots of ways to pool the whole cooperative extension system into the farm to school activities that we're doing. And we've also had quite a few interns that have helped with it, and even class projects and campus where they help do some media design and things like that. So there's lots of great resources that have helped make our program successful. And as Marie had said, the essential resources are food service directors. There's no farm to school program unless they're on board, because ultimately they're responsible for making the bottom line meet in their cafeteria, making sure that they don't go in the red at the end of the year in terms of food costs and things like that. And even if principals and superintendents are gung-ho about farm to school, if you don't have those food service directors, it's really hard to get any traction. So that's essential. It's also essential to have the cafeteria staff also on board. We kind of learned this the hard way with our apple sectionizers. We thought that, that was low-hanging fruit, pun intended, that there was research to show that the apple sectionizers worked and that kids would be more likely to eat their apples. So we bought all the apple sectionizers. We delivered them to the food service directors who were on board with apple sectionizers, and went back to one of the cafeterias in an elementary school, assuming we'd see it out there and it'd be working. And we're like, where's the apple sectionizer? And after some sleuthing around, we found it in the broom closet, because the cafeteria monitor thought that perhaps it was dangerous for the kids to use, but really she just wasn't up for the change and having to do that extra step of helping the kids with their apples. So we had to take a big step back and educate her why the apple sectionizer was there and all about farm to school, and get more champions in the schools behind it. And now, of course, it's running perfectly in that cafeteria, but we had kind of missed the step there to get everybody on board before we dropped those sectionizers off. Time, again, you have to really create these relationships, and that takes time. And the excitement for the whole community is an important part of just really getting the buy-in for this, and the education piece. Obviously, we needed to educate the cafeteria monitors and staff, as well as the students, about things to get them excited to buy into farm to school. Champions, or things that we could really use, there can't be enough champions for farm to schools in all the different sectors. So you need student champions that help convince their friends to try the samples and to order the farm to school menu items. You need champions in the cafeteria. I can't tell you how many food service staffs I've encountered that say they don't like vegetables. And so, again, that's where you have to have the time and the relationship and the education to be able to say to them, can you at least make sure you don't make a face when you're serving the vegetable to the kids, so that they won't want to try it either. So, we're doing taste samples with them and getting them to be champions for the kids, to encourage the kids to try the new foods. And school staff and community members, farmers, we need champions in all those sectors to really get the momentum and excitement for farm to school. Scratch cooking is kind of a tricky thing. A lot of the schools have gone to more easier to prepare, pre-prepared foods, but for farm to school to really work, especially with some of the fruits and vegetables, it just tastes better the more scratch cooking that the schools can do. For example, though, like we have a source of local beef in our county, but the schools are used to getting the 2.5-ounce pre-cooked flatty patty burgers and really aren't willing to steer away from that and get raw beef in. But we compromised, and they can get raw beef for making their tacos and things like that. But they can only do that maybe every 6 weeks, because it is more work for them and slightly more expensive. So some of those smoother systems, a lot of those burgers too, those flatty patties, they get from commodity food. So we really could use some systems where some of the government agencies are working together to make some of the commodity foods come from local sources. That would be super helpful. And supply chains and things like that. The smoother we can make those run, the easier it is for the food service directors to really get on board for farm to school. And of course, all of that takes time. What we still want to achieve, some of you might have heard that in the government's budget for next year, there's a line to increase reimbursement of school meals to 25 cents for the schools that are supplying at least 30% of their products from New York State, which is huge. 25% reimbursement for meals is 4 times what it currently is. And so if we can help our schools reach that 30% mark, and it does include fluid milk, so they're already almost halfway there with just the milk alone. So helping them get the rest of their products from New York State to reach that 30% mark will ultimately offset some of the costs of farm to school. So that's something that we really want to help our schools achieve. The nice thing about that too is currently we find that the schools don't have a consistent way of tracking local products for us to be able to report out. So I think having this 30% benchmark will help them also track some of their purchases from local products a little bit easier, so we can help report that to ag markets. Of course, we want the students to happily eat the local products. It's not good nutrition unless they eat it, which kind of goes without saying, but sometimes I think that does get lost. So we want to make sure that that we're coming up with menu items that actually taste good, and that's why we do the education before it appears on the menu so that they get a chance to try it. And of course, all the nutrition educators out there know that it takes lots of repetition of a new food for it to be accepted. So we need to keep pushing it, even if maybe they didn't like the butternutty mac and cheese the first time. If they keep seeing it on the menu, they're more likely to start to accept it. And the big lofty goals, of course, is increased fruit and vegetable consumption for better health outcomes. And the state, of course, would also like to see regional and economic benefits to farmers and schools. Okay, I think it's on to Cailin now. And again, when you guys have questions, if you can just put them in the chat box, and we'll be getting that to those at the end.
Thanks, Mo. Can everybody, or Mo, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, and I'm going on mute.
All right, perfect. Let me just get to my screen here. Oops, sorry guys, I have to jump forward a little bit. Hang on one second. Thank you for your patience. Here we go. So I can start talking a little bit while this is pulling up. So I am obviously from Wayne County, and our farm to school efforts really started this past winter. So we started working with a team of food service directors and our local food hub, actually. All right, is that visible now? Can everybody see that? Let's see. Oops. Okay, great. All right, sorry everybody. So yes, we started working with this team of food service directors in about December of this past year. So the program that we really developed was called Wayne Wednesdays, and I'll go to the next slide here. Our group's name was GROW, so Gathering Regional Offerings in Wayne County, if you can see that. Wayne Wednesdays is kind of our local take on New York Thursdays. The food service directors actually thought of this name, and so we just decided to run with it. So essentially we're serving a local product on the last Wednesday of every month, and we have almost all of the school districts in our county participating, but not everyone. That's one of our goals for the future, is to get everyone participating. But we do have, I think, eight school districts participating. So again, this coalition started in about December. Our food service directors, one in particular, were really motivated to enhance their farm to school offerings, and we did this by really capitalizing on an existing relationship that a few of the school districts had with a local food hub called Headwater Food Hub in Ontario. So I'll go ahead to the next slide here so you can see that. Just make sure that I don't have any emergencies happening in chat. Okay, yes, everything looks good. Okay.
Cailin, this is Kim.
Yeah, please.
You see that your full slide isn't showing. It's your notes and your other slide?
Yeah, I can see that, and I'm trying to get it to play from the current
Okay.
slide, but it doesn't seem to want to cooperate. So let me try
It
again.
works like this.
Okay, of course, because I said it now, it's going to work.
Okay.
All right, great. Okay, anyway, so everyone, who's making it happen? Obviously, we have our food service directors and Headwater Food Hub. The participation of the Food Hub has really been essential in making this work fairly quickly. So our sort of gung-ho food service director, who's right here, has an extensive relationship with the Food Hub because they're close in geographic proximity to their school. And she's been doing some special events with the Food Hub, bringing in products like corn and Brussels sprouts on, I think, Harvest of the Month day or some day in October, just so that kids can have a fun experience like shucking corn or plucking Brussels sprouts off of the stalks to be prepared actually in the cafeteria. So they have a really good history, and she decided that it was time that all of the other food service directors in schools really get on board. So she reached out to me because I have a good relationship with her and a few other of the directors and said, let's get a meeting together. And that happened in December, and everyone was in agreement. And we had our first Wayne Wednesday on January 31st of 2018. So this is going to continue through May. We decided not to do it for the month of June just because June is a crazy month. But it's been really successful so far. So we've served potatoes, carrots, and butternut squash, and I think that this month is either dried beans or kale. And the first month, based on what the Food Hub reported to me, they served 1,000 pounds of multicolored potatoes, which was a pretty amazing thing to be able to share. Okay, so essential resources for this project. Again, that motivated food service director that is sort of acting as an informal county champion to build momentum and make sure that everybody is on board. Her previous experience working with the Food Hub and her established relationship was excellent, but also ours at Extension as well. We connect farmers to their hub who are looking to expand their markets. They contact us with questions about markets and where they might be moving next. So they're a relatively young organization, well, business I should say. They're a for-profit business, and we've been fairly closely involved with them throughout their journey to where they are today. That food service director also recruited her school's PR department to help with some marketing, which is where you saw the nice logo here up in the top right. That's the logo that particular school actually developed and have allowed all of the schools to use. So that was really, really useful because PR is something that we don't have as a strength in CCE, but we were able to sort of piece together through all of the through all the school districts, sorry. Okay, another essential resource, logistics with Headwater. They are definitely an excellent resource in terms of logistics. Because we have all of the schools participating together, they're able to put in orders all at the same time. So we've been able to coordinate not only purchasing, but also distribution. So we had all of our butternut squash, because it was IQF, individually quick frozen, all of our carrots, and all of our dried beans delivered to all the schools on the same day, because we didn't need them all at the same time, but obviously the squash could be kept frozen and the dried beans were dried. So 3 months worth was all delivered at once, and that really helped to cut costs. They also already have trucks, so they can distribute to the schools. So our schools didn't have to worry about how they were going to, cover the costs of procurement, really. I mean, obviously it's worked into the cost of the product, but minimized in this case. Finally, essential resource, food service director input. They were really incremental in choosing the products and working with Headwater to identify what they were going to need and what kids would eat. So making sure that the squash was cut, identifying things that were going to be minimally processed or require minimal processing on their part was really essential, because as Mo mentioned before, a lot of their staff don't have the skills or the time to be able to scratch cook or even put together a meal that requires processing of vegetables. Really can't stress this enough, relationships. The fact that Extension in this case was involved, I think, is due almost entirely to our history of working with our food service directors. I've been working with one director in particular for the past year and a half or so on some other projects in his districts, and that was really a key in for us. He was instrumental in getting us to the table and saying, hey, Extension should really be involved because they can contribute nutrition education, some informational flyers and marketing materials, which is the bulk of what I have been doing for the school districts. The food service structures in our county have also, for the most part, been working there for decades, so they know what CC's reputation is, and they've also been trained in smarter lunchroom strategies. They're familiar with farm to school. Like, they've all pretty much been around the block. So they all also know each other and didn't have to really lay any relationship groundwork before they were able to start working on this project rather quickly. Okay, what we could really use is having all school districts on board. I think Steve mentioned in the chat that one of his food service directors is contracted, and we have that challenge as well. He is not really able to have a lot of flexibility with his menus because he's contracted, and as such has not really been involved in any part of the process so far. And I think that's pretty lamentable because it would be great for the students, for the district, for the community, but there's really only so much that we can do. So I'm not sure what our next step will be moving forward to get him and his school district on board. I think that that's a separate conversation that we need to have because it's sort of a unique case in our county, but I'm really hopeful that we can get him on board as well. Other things that we could really use, some small amounts of funding for promotional items like stickers and pins. I've really been working to increase the visibility of Farm to School, both inside and outside the schools through a Facebook group. I've been managing some posts on Twitter just to get the word out in as many places as possible, and that has gone pretty well, especially using boosted Facebook ads, which are a relatively inexpensive way to just generate outreach to parents. But it would also be nice to do some more in-school promotion, sort of like Marie was mentioning, where we have more people in the schools doing taste tests and handing out stickers and pins to some of the younger kids to really encourage their adventurous trying of new things. Like all schools, we need more time and tools for fresh food prep. That is a universal, I think. And we also need more education for students on not just nutrition, but also food waste and eating habits. So, you know, pacing yourself as you're eating so that you can actually finish your lunch at a young age. And making sure that you are selecting things that you're going to eat. Those are some, I think, up and coming challenges beyond just basic nutrition that we'll be seeing as we keep doing this. And I already mentioned volunteers for taste tests. Okay, what we still want to achieve, like I mentioned, better outreach. I think that that's a constant. We would like to have more regular Wayne Wednesdays. Right now we're just doing once a month, which I think is a perfect first go around. I think if we had done any more this first year, given the lead time we gave this project, that we would have been in way over our heads. But this was a great workload, I think, for our first attempt. It would also be excellent to have less out-of-pocket costs for food service directors. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, how can they afford to be purchasing from a rather specialty food hub once a month? And I'll be candid, it is a challenge. It is not necessarily cost competitive what they're doing, but the fact that they're only doing it once a month is helpful. It's also helpful that because they're all purchasing together, we can minimize costs. But in the future, it definitely needs to be more sustainable. And we don't know if that means involving other distributors that are working locally but maybe a little bit more cost effective, or if that involves some creative solutions with grant supplements, etc. We'd also like to add more crops to the mix. Marie mentioned that apples and grapes were low-hanging fruit, but we actually didn't get into grapes at all, so maybe working with pears or something else would be nice for the kids. And then finally, this is my personal end goal, is to really normalize this on the menu so that we don't even have special events for local food anymore. It's just always there. I think that would be really the most sustainable way to do this, at least in our area, maybe in other schools as well. So, okay, I think that that's it for my end, and I thank you all for your patience with our technical issues, which were pretty minimal, I would admit. And we thank you all for participating today and would love to hear your questions in the comments. So Kim, I don't know if you should moderate or if I should keep moderating, but whatever way works best.
I'm here if you need me. I think you're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Recommendation for people to chat in the chat box and select to all panelists and attendees. It does kind of look like everybody can actually see the all panelists, but if you select all attendees, we'll be sure that everyone can see the chats as people send questions to you. But I'll keep it to you, Cailin.
Okay, so I'll just start with what I can see here. Steve McDonald asked, how do we define local? Is that within the county, within the state? I can say that from my end, our definition of local has been as much within our county as we can, but with definitely a few exceptions. So our butternut squash came from 1 or 2 counties over, but we're still able to say, that it's pretty regional. Marie and Mo, would you like to weigh in?
This is Mo. I just wanted to say that for New York State Ag and Markets purposes, obviously the entire New York State is what they're looking at, and that's what they're looking at for the 30% sourced locally is New York State for the 25-cent reimbursement. That said, we still are looking and working with our local farms in Seneca County and the Finger Lakes primarily.
This is Marie. To address the local question, we sat down and each school sort of had a different view of local, but for the purposes of our grant, we did go with a 100-mile radius. Again, we were working across 3 counties, so that makes a pretty big radius. And I would say, although we were trying to use that as our working definition, in reality, I think the Finger Lakes region was really more in the eyes of food service directors local, which in a way is really nice and frankly a bit more realistic because we can't source everything from Ontario County that we would like on school menus, but at the same time, from the ag economic development standpoint, we obviously would like as much to come from our local farms as possible. I would also add real quick just from the USDA side, for those of you not familiar with the USDA's Farm to School census, that was done, I believe, in 2013, 2014, and then released in 2015, and they actually have that question on there as well, how do you define local? If you can look up schools by district and zip code, so if you're curious as to what schools in your area are doing, that would be a great place to start.
Are there any other questions? Feel free to type them in the chat box. I can't remember if we're here until 10:45 or 11, but I mean, just keep going.
We do wrap up at 10:45, so you just have one, and then we've got to get on to the next webinar. So.
Perfect. Okay, well, I will just, yeah, go ahead, Mo.
Real quick, Cailin, I see a note from Jake, who has a Ag and Markets grant, and says that he feels very similar to the same goals and needs that we were talking about today. And I did just want to mention to everyone on the call that there is some momentum at the state level to find a forum and a way for everyone who's interested and involved in farm to school programming to get together and share that. I know the local food and regional systems that Anu is doing and Kathy have set something up, and there's even talk of a program work team. So we need to keep the conversation going. And we're looking at ways that we could do that.
Thanks, Mo.
Sure.
Yes, please, the program work team sounds lovely. Yes, we all agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to follow up with us individually or whatever way is easy for you.
And this is Kim Fleming. Just want to thank the 3 of you. Each segment was so informative and creative, and just what you've been doing building relationships around this topic is really a nice highlight to share with everyone. So grateful you can be part of the system conference, and I know we've got talent with all 3 of you. So glad you're out there and working together and spreading the word. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you all. Take care, everybody.
Bye.